Okay, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachaline Nivasisha Sunyavadi Pashtatara Satarine Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. So we're on part one, chapter one, and we should probably finish chapter one today. And so far, we have discussed the last three sessions together. We looked at the significance of Srila Prabhupada's naming his society, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. I won't elaborate on that. Hopefully, you can remember the details of that. And the ultimate definition of what is Krishna consciousness, yeah, in regards to Goloka Bandhavan and entering into a divine relationship with Krishna in one of the four rasas. We spoke about that. That is what it means ultimately to be Krishna conscious. And we spoke about the importance of understanding the process, Sambandha Gyan. We have Abhidaya, Sambandha, and Prayoja. Yeah, no, excuse me, Sambandha, Abhidaya, and Prayoja. So we mentioned, just a reminder again, that for us to advance nicely in Krishna consciousness, it helps to have a very good, clear understanding of our relationship with the Lord and the Lord's relationship with us and the material energy, etc. And Maharaj also spoke about the importance of not just having a superficial understanding of Prabhupada's books, but having quite a deep and good understanding of the content of Srila Prabhupada's books. And then last week we spoke about how devotion awakens, and that took up most of the session. So I'll just give a quick review of that. And as usual, anyone has questions or comments, please feel free to unmute, or you can put them in the chat. Okay, so we're open for questions or discussion. Right, so we spoke about how devotion awakens. So we mentioned about how bhakti being of the Sarup Shakti of Krishna is independent, as is Krishna. So in that sense, bhakti is born from bhakti. Yeah, it is devotion that gives rise to devotion. And that devotion in the jiva will manifest through the grace of a devotee, someone who has devotion. And we mentioned as well, there's some discussion as well. It comes from the association of devotees. That's how we get bhakti. It may come.
My bowl was full. That's why I didn't take it. Never mind.
Could you? Thank you, Mavalidi. It also can come from Krishna himself, although it's very, very exceptional circumstances. It can come, Prabhupada said, directly from Sastra. Yeah, but we mentioned, however it comes, to cultivate devotion to perfection, then we need association of devotees. So the association of devotees is needed to cultivate devotion. And if you remember as well, we also mentioned that there may be exceptional circumstances where devotee association is not available. And then Krishna may act as pure association from within the heart. We mentioned that. And also we mentioned Bhakti Devi, that's the Bhakti Devi herself. She impels devotees to, or she inspires, perhaps that's a better word. She inspires devotees to share devotion. How? By invoking their compassion for conditioned souls. Yeah. So then the next question then comes up. Okay, then, so why do devotees give devotion to some jivas and not to others? So if you just joined us, we're just doing a summary of last week's session. So we looked at that. Why do devotees give devotion to some jivas and not to others? And this relates to the discrimination of preachers who distribute devotion, and also to the receptivity of the jiva or those to accept it. So these 2 points. The discrimination of preachers. So what do we mean by discrimination of preachers? Well, then we was referring to the verse from 11th canto Srimad Bhagavatam, Ishvara tat adineshu bodhisatsu dvisatsuja prema maitri kripo bhiksha yat koroti samajjamaha. Hopefully you can remember this discussion. So the translation: an intermediate second-class devotee, a Madhyama, shows love for Krishna. He is friendly to all devotees. Remember, Ramanath Sutta brought that up as an important point, that he's friendly to all devotees. He's very merciful to the neophytes and ignorant people, and he neglects those who are envious. Okay, so from this definition, we concluded it's clear that the intermediate devotees, known as the Madhyam Adhikaris, they are friends to all. And in order to give devotion, they do discriminate between different classes of persons, meaning they give devotion to those who are receptive, yeah, those who are not envious, yeah. So they will not. So they are unwilling. So and they see those who are unwilling, the envious. Okay. Any questions so far? We're all clear as we can be of what we discussed last week. Now, sometimes we discussed as well, sometimes neophytes, or also known as Kanishtas or Kanishta Adhikari, and very advanced devotees, they also distribute Krishna consciousness. And we brought up the point that a highly elevated devotee like Srila Prabhupada, they sometimes act and they come down as from the intermediate platform, and they preach, but their preaching is very powerful. Yeah. And sometimes even Kanishta or the devotees in third class, they also can instill devotion in the hearts of others. Okay. And now that ability, so the ability to hear or to accept depends on both opportunity and receptivity. So both of these depend on the piety of the potential hearer. Okay, so then this question was raised. So how do non-devotees, who by definition are not interested in devotion, come in contact with devotional service? So I'll put it out as a question. We did touch on it at the end of last week's session. Be good to hear some of you. So how do non-devotees, so where does it begin? Those are not interested in devotion. How can they come in contact with, or how do they come in contact with devotional service? Mother Chandravali mentioned it last week. And we had this picture. Let me get this slide up quickly. This one here. It's something called Agnata Sukriti. Yeah, so unknowing devotional acts. Yeah. So for example, here we gave this example in that slide. You find it again. Here. Prabodhananda Saraswati Thakur, in offering Lord Chaitanya to come to a more better seat than where one washes their feet, he he unknowingly did some devotional service. And we have here the devotees distributing books. This person is perhaps giving a donation, so they are engaging in devotional service unknown to them. And someone might appreciate the Harinam Sankirtan. Yeah. So in that way, it's called Agnata Sukriti. Okay, so this is how those, again, those who may not, or those who do not have any devotion, they can come to devotion by this Agnata Sukriti. Okay? So now that answers the third question. So persons who receive devotional service do so because of their own receptivity combined with the discriminating initiative of the preacher. Just something here in the chat, 1 second. Would distributing Bushardam come under that category? Yes, for sure. Yeah, especially if they, Jay Ved puts in the chat. Yes, for sure. That's why distributing Bushardam is so glorious, So many times, sometimes homeless people, when I'm walking around central London and I'm walking around in a dhoti, some homeless people, they always call out in a respectful way, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Why? Because they get food from the Hare Krishnas. Yeah, so they're very kind of respectful. Yeah, so that's Agnata Sukriti. Yeah. Okay. And so now continuing then, we're going to pick it up from just finishing here. So in other words, there is many different ways. We just touched on some general principles here. But there's many different ways how it happens that persons come to devotional service. For example, someone who has very little Agnata Sukriti, if they hear from a great devotee, they haven't got much background in any unknowing devotional service, they may not. But because if they hear from a great devotee like Srila Prabhupada, for example, so and it may be only after many years, they may take an interest in devotional, in a devotional service. Yeah. Sometimes someone may be very receptive, and they may hear from someone who's just beginning, who's just in the beginning stages. But that person who that beginner is speaking to quickly takes to devotion. And sometimes it's seen that they may even surpass the persons who actually brought them to Krishna consciousness. Yeah, so in other words, also sometimes someone with very little piety can quickly advance in pure devotion. So one example of that is Mugrari, the hunter. That story is mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. By the grace of Narada, then he quickly came to the level of pure devotion. Now, he had very little piety. He was a very wicked person. He used to half kill animals and take pleasure in half killing animals. Yeah, but he made great advancement just by the grace of Narada Muni. And sometimes also we hear stories of some devotees were introduced and even received some initial training in Krishna consciousness. But those persons who introduced them, at some point they leave devotional service, or they had already left devotional service, or they had already left the path of Krishna consciousness, but they're still sympathetic. So they meet someone and they preach to them. about Krishna consciousness, even though they're not following Krishna consciousness. And that person who they meet and give a book to, they become Krishna conscious. So that also happens as well, you know. So there's some of the ways in which, and there's many more, in which people may receive and accept pure devotion. But the overriding point or the overriding factor is the mercy of the devotees. Yeah, that's the overriding factor. Their hearts overflowing with compassion for the conditioned souls. So there's many, yeah, few people. What? Yeah, sorry, few people coming in. Hare Krishna. Okay, ready to go forward. So now then, the next section that we're going to be discussed is exactly, what do we how we've already mentioned how devotion awakens. So another question that is discussed is what is it that the jiva receives when devotion becomes manifest in them? Okay, so this is important point to understand, because if we get a clear understanding of this, it's going to help us to understand devotional service in both its pure and its mixed forms. Okay, so now the seed of the creeper of devotion, I'm sure you've heard of this term. Yeah, so it's figurative. So exactly what it is more precisely, this is described here. This is from Majjhila 19.151, and I'm sure some of you know this verse. Pramanda Brahmati Kona Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Pashai Prashade Bhakti Lada Beach. So this is the second half of the verse in the slide. I just read it. Out of many millions of wandering living entities, one who is very fortunate gets an opportunity to associate with a bona fide spiritual master by the grace of Krishna. By the mercy of both Krishna and the spiritual master, such a person receives the seed of the creeper of devotional service. So what is that? What is it exactly? What does that mean? Yeah, so Prabhupada in the Majjhila, and I think there's teachings to Rupa Goswami, he actually gives more details. And here he mentions this. So this seed it's the method, the rules and regulations by which one is trained in devotional service constitute the Bhakti Ladder Bija. So this is the seed of devotional service. So this is what we are getting from the devotees. This is what devotees are distributing. They give an opportunity for people to come to Krishna consciousness. So now, once having received it, a second, someone's coming, getting a bit distracted here. So once having received the creeper of devotion, it's up to, we say, the jiva, yeah, they must embrace it, embrace and that transcendental knowledge in order to sow it in the garden of the heart. Yeah, so that seed of pure devotion must be regularly watered, obviously through hearing and chanting specifically. So now this is the essence of Suddha Bhakti Cintamani. We're going to hear how to hear and chant in a way that allows the seed of devotion to fructify. So this study is going to take us through all the different stages of devotion. Okay? But just focusing on here, the actual seed. Someone could read this for us in the slide.
Can I read?
Yes, please.
The seed of devotion cannot sprout. The seed of devotion cannot sprout unless watered by the process of hearing and chanting. One should submissively receive the transcendental messages from spiritual advanced sources and chant the very same message for one's own benefit and for the benefit of one's audience. Adi Leela 2,
Okay,
117.
1-7. Okay, so Prabhupada's giving more details here. So, and this picture you see here, we won't get into describing the details of this picture, or we will use it throughout this presentation. But for now, just try and picture as is like this the seed of devotion that is given. What it actually is, it's the methods and rules and regulations by which one is trained. That's the seed of bhakti that is actually given. Okay, so now the point that's being brought out here is that every action, it begins with a inaugural seed. Yeah, so the bhakti ladder bij, it coming from a devotee, the same, even you could say even something mundane, something even sinful, the action begins with a seed of knowledge. Yeah. So the action to perform an activity begins with a specific inspiration of knowledge. So Prabhupada said this here. Now I just read here. This is again Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 19.152. So Prabhupada explains, everything has an original cause or seed. For any idea, program, plan, or device, there is first the contemplation of a plan. So that is called bija or seed. And then the quote we've heard again, the methods, rules, and regulations by which one is perfectly trained in devotional service constitute the bhakti ladder bij, or seed of devotional service. Okay? So this bhakti ladder bij, just continuing to read, is received from the spiritual master by the grace of Krishna. Other seeds called Anyabhilasata Bij include Karma Bij and Jnana Bij. If one is not fortunate enough to receive the Bhakti Ladder Bij from the spiritual master, he instead cultivates seeds such as Karma Bij, Jnana Bij, or political, social, or philanthropic bijas. However, the Bhakti Ladder Bij is different from these other bijas. Okay? So Prabhupada here, he's broadening the concept of what is meant by bija. So it's the type of knowledge a person receives that corresponds to the type of seed they're going to sow in their hearts. Okay, so if we get the seed of pure devotion, we are cultivating pure devotion. Yeah, if one gets this, or as we're just, yeah. So in other words, further knowledge of a subject and its actions, they're inspired by knowledge. So it cultivates that seed into a creeper, and then it will give its own distinctive fruits and flowers. Now, so this is something worth thinking about because Maharaj brings this up. It's very important to consider this point. So for those who we've dedicated ourselves to achieving Krishna consciousness, we should be careful. We have to be careful because if we're submissively hearing mundane topics unrelated to Krishna, it will have effect on the heart. So hearing mundane topics, like here we got, this jungle maze of mundane creepers. So I just read directly from here. Maharaj speaks quite straightforwardly here. So that kind of hearing sows non-devotional seeds. Okay, seeds caused and nurtured by, he mentions mundane movies, mundane music, mundane books, okay, even mundane education, magazines. So they all, he mentions they kind of compete and they can suppress the growth of the bhakti ladder bija, of the delicate creeper of devotion that we may have. And Marge, he goes on to explain that, he says, 3 decades after Prabhupada's disappearance, he said, it's not uncommon to hear even initiated devotees frequenting mundane movies, or these days you don't, you can watch mundane movies right on your computer. Yeah. And listening to mundane music, now these things were unheard of during Prabhupada's time, you know. But devotees sometimes they don't consider the effects that this may have. Yeah. It can, for instance, one takes to Krishna consciousness and one is engaged in the process of Krishna consciousness, but we may not be purified completely of our material attachments. So for one reason or another, one starts again going to where one came from. Then one's previous attachments are going to become inflamed. Yeah, if one again starts to expose oneself to all these, for example, here on the slide, yeah, then one is just fanning, one again is rekindling one's material attachments. Yeah. So that can have serious effects. Yeah. Especially I could say excuse me, in an information crazed age. That is such a jungle of mundane creepers out there to attract our attention. Yeah. So Marge describes quite graphically that it can strangle the hearts of conditioned souls with their tendrils and poison them with a fruit. Yeah. Now, what's the path out of such bewilderment? So it means to focus, well, that is focusing on the cultivation of the Bhakti ladder bija. Yeah. Now, it's not, it's here right now, it's not possible to discuss the countless, you could say, creepers that grow from various types of mundane knowledge that will just perpetuate the cycle of birth and death. Yeah. And Prabhupada says, there's just a few he mentioned: social, political, philanthropic seeds, to name a few. So again, just to make it clear that any activity that someone does, let's say mundane activity or plan, it starts with an inaugural seed. That's where it starts from. So our devotional life, pure devotion, it starts from a specific point. Yeah, and that point is pure, or that point is knowledge. That point is hearing and chanting. Then the creeper of pure devotion will grow. Yeah. Now, some seeds, they may not be seeds of pure devotion, but they may contain knowledge or concepts that are partially devotional. So that's known as an abas. So they contain what's called a semblance of pure devotion. And they're known as abas bhakti ladder bijas. Okay, you follow so far? Any questions or comments, please feel free to ask. So again, there's some seeds, they're not completely material, but they're not completely pure devotion as well. They may be a semblance of devotion. So So semblance, if you look in a dictionary, it means it's the outward appearance or apparent form of something. So it appears like or apparently looks like, for example, devotion, but it's not. Yeah. So there's two kinds. So one here it says karma bija and jnana bija. So transcendental knowledge, when we're receiving transcendental knowledge, but mixed in is a desire for material enjoyment. So that's called karma beach. There's some they're studying, maybe hearing Bhagavad Gita, but because they've received a karma beach, or because they're, haven't accepted the seed of pure devotion, they are still maintaining the desire to enjoy materially. So it's karma beach. Yeah? Another one is jnana bija. So this is, again, transcendental knowledge. It's polluted with a desire for liberation. Yeah, yeah. So where does this come from? How does one acquire the seed of a semblance of devotion? You follow? We follow so far? Or explaining?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yes? Okay. So now, where does it come from? Well, it doesn't take hard to actually find or see, because many religionist persons who claim to be religious, or even philosophers, coming from the Vedic or even the non-Vedic schools, they may consider acts of devotion or acts of devotion or God, or some level of God consciousness, as a means to gain sense gratification. Yeah. Or so these two things, they incorporate the spirit of enjoyment, that's the karma beach, or the spirit of indifference into the concept of devotion. So when they disseminate this distorted knowledge of devotion, that's why Rupa Goswami goes to great lengths to explain to us what is actually pure devotion, and that's Anyabilastra Sanyam Jnana Kamari Anavritam Anukulyena Krishnano Siddhana Bhakti Uttama. And we will be discussing that verse in quite some detail. So there, Rupa Goswami gives a very clear definition of what is actually pure devotion. Yeah. So these other, we're calling them bijas, or these other karma bij and jnana bija, they have their fruits, but it's not the same as the fruits of the bhakti ladder bija. Although it may seem like they're engaged in some type of devotion, but their goal is different. For example, they want to attain the heavenly planets, or they're some level of detachment from the world, but they're not interested in love of Godhead. Now they're less fortunate. This person, they're less fortunate, because if they got the seed of pure or the Bhakti-Lada Bija, they would cultivate pure devotion. Yeah. And they would quickly taste the fruits of service to Krishna. So instead, they just rotate in the cycle of birth and death. Now, yeah, especially in personal philosophy, Mayavad, and also Western materialism, they've kind of have a misunderstanding. They have polluted what is actually the real faith of the jiva, the real pure faith. They've polluted the eternal, what's also known as Sanatan Dharma. Yeah. So, and they sometimes even call it bhakti. You know? Like, for instance, we may have the experience where sometimes you approach someone saying, coming from Indian origin, and they say, I know all about Krishna. But what they know is kind of often it's a distorted picture. So sometimes it's often, to artificially, they try to make everything one without distinction. But they say, yes, I know all about Krishna. Yeah. So sometimes from our experience in the temple, it's often many persons they come and they're interested, they're attracted to the temple. They're coming from some type of Hindu tradition. But most of them have not a clear understanding of what Krishna consciousness is about. Yeah. So often when we're explaining to them, they have all types of misconceptions. I'm sure if Tripad's with us, he has plenty of experience on reception. They have all types of misconceptions of what devotion is all about, or their idea is for material prosperity. And like here, like I'm in America at the moment, and these prosperity preachers are very active. You see this picture here. Yeah, there's a whole church. It's called the Prosperity Movement, and the whole idea of going to church, the whole idea of prayer, the whole idea of holding our hands together in the air and singing the glories of the Lord is because the Lord's going to make us prosperous. Yeah, he's going to provide us everything we want materially. Yeah. So they're going to church, they're going to even to the mosque, to the synagogue, even to the temple. In that sense, it looks devotional. They're going into a sacred place. But because they have it's a semblance of devotion because their knowledge is distorted. They don't have knowledge of pure devotion. They haven't been given or accepted the seed of pure devotion. So, um, so therefore their goal is completely different. Now, they can have a change if by fortune they come in contact with devotees on the path of pure devotion. And that's what we're doing as representatives of Prabhupada, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, is we are giving or we are bringing those with all types of semblances of devotion, and we're giving them an opportunity to actually develop pure devotion, to accept the Bhakti ladder bija. And that's what we're doing. That's what a temple's about. That's where we are educating people, if they're ready, what is actually pure devotion. Yeah. Now, so they can. So they do have, if they come in contact with the devotees, and also if also they hear submissively, and they have to come to the point where they admit their previous misconceptions. So in that way, they can become eligible to actually practice pure devotional service. Okay. So again, just summarizing this point. So the type of knowledge someone receives, that determines the type of seed they sow in the heart. Yeah. So the type of knowledge they receive, that's the type of seed they're going to sow in the heart. Okay. Now, if someone is fortunate to receive transcendental knowledge from a pure devotee, they get the opportunity to practice pure devotion. And summarizing, there are those who receive impure or distorted knowledge. Yeah, they don't receive the knowledge of pure devotion. So they will just continue to wander in a cycle of birth and death. So again, when they meet pure devotees, then the devotees, they can open the door for them for pure devotional service. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on this? Any comments or questions?
Can I ask a question?
Please, Alexander.
If
Yes.
if a person comes in contact with a Vaishnav, but he doesn't have these two qualities for to be qualified, as such as faith and humility, is there any way he can um, still hear and not over, overly become defensive? Because usually these people are overly attached to their previous faith.
Yeah, you're going to, it's very much depends on the specific circumstances. I mean, devotees are very kind and they're very merciful and they're very compassionate. So even someone who may not be ready to hear, one that may not be ready to hear from a devotee or to accept, at least devotees, if they leave a good impression upon the person, then that in of itself can put them instead. That can put them instead for taking up devotion. That's like if they appreciate the devotee. So even though they may not be ready, if a devotee is polite, like for instance, a book distributor may meet someone and they're not interested in the book, I ain't interested, mate. But devotee is kind to them. Okay, thank you for stopping, and and the devotee is not agitated. Then that impression that can have quite a dramatic effect, actually. Yeah. That's why it's so important when devotees are distributing books on the street, for example, that they're just out there as well to actually give a good impression, even to those who are not interested. I remember one friend of mine who joined Krishna consciousness about the same time as me, and he mentioned that he was on Oxford Street. He was under various types of intoxication, and a devotee approached him and he could hardly hear what the devotee was saying, but he noticed that the devotee was smiling even though he completely ignored him. This my friend who actually became a devotee, made it a point to make out that this devotee doesn't exist, to completely ignore him. He was doing it with intent. But the devotee, he noticed the devotee wasn't the slightest bit upset or agitated, and that went in his heart. That impression of that devotee, he kept thinking about it. Then eventually eventually he came to the temple and he became a devotee. Okay, so it can happen by the grace of a devotee, even someone who's not willing, yeah, if they have some little appreciation, then that can be the cause of them taking up devotional service. Especially devotees, if they're practicing nicely, then they look effulgent and attractive. So that even unknowing, even persons may not register it very, it may be just a small thing where they just appreciate a devotee. So, okay, you have to unmute Alexander Hu. Is that?
Yes, yes. I think
Yeah.
as a devotee is sincere in his endeavor to enlighten somebody, he starts to glow and creates
Yeah,
a, even if his words didn't touch their mind, their
impression of their personality. Yeah.
yes.
Now, there may be envious persons. That's something else. Those who are antagonistic, they can still get the mercy, but generally it's gonna generally not. If one is very envious and antagonistic towards devotees, that can be an impediment for them taking up devotional service. Also, there are stories of persons who took to Krishna consciousness after attacking the Harinam, for example. But at some point they had a change of heart. So something happened and they had a change of disposition towards the devotees. Yeah. Okay, but the main point here, perhaps here, is that we know people come from all types of different backgrounds, all types of misconceptions of what is God consciousness, what is devotion. Yeah, they have all types, because they have all types of misunderstandings. They haven't been given the seed of pure devotion. Yeah. So they have all types of misconceptions. So their goals are completely different. So, for instance, you see persons come and they look religious, but actually it's a semblance of pure devotion. Okay. So also just again to reiterate this point that this here, we should be very careful with what we're exposing ourselves to and what type of bejas or what type of seeds we are planting in our heart. What type of material desires we are planting in our heart by exposing ourselves to so many mundane things, yeah, just by watching mundane movies. It may be very subtle. Because we're not completely purified, we may see something in a movie and we think, oh, I wish I could become. I wish I could have. I wish I could live like that. And it may be subtle, but it goes in as a bija. It goes in as a seed. And it's there, that desire is planted. And if we're not very conscientious, and if we're not working to uproot, and that's the next chapter, which speaks about uprooting the unwanted bejas, then we may find our our devotional bija gets strangled. Yeah. And it may be a gradual thing as well. It may be gradual. It may be that these mundane bejas are in the heart. It may take a few years before it manifests and gives fruits and flowers of taking one away from the association of devotees. Okay. So we did mention in the beginning that this is quite, some of these subjects can bring up quite a bit actually when we started to have this type of discussion. Yeah. But is there any more questions or comments on this before we could move into the next chapter? And let me just dig it out. Hare Krishna. Just bear with me 1 minute. I thought we might not get to the next chapter, but we have, so that's good. Let me just find it. Okay, 1 second. Moving a few things around on my screen and okay. Okay, so now moving to chapter 2. Now, we're going to speak about the first, as we mentioned, Suddha Bhakti Cintamani takes us through the different stages of devotional development. So the first, we give an example of the seed of devotion is planted. So if it's planted, if we receive that seed and we engage in the watering process of following, remember that following the rules and regulations that are given, that is part of that is the seed, that is part of the watering process. So if we engage in hearing and chanting nicely, then the first sprout to appear from the creeper of pure devotion is something called Shraddha. Yeah, so faith. So, but this Shraddha, this is the eternal pure faith of the living entity. So we are all parts and parcels of Krishna. So we have that. It's there within the heart originally. So by taking the seed of pure devotion, first thing to manifest, the first creeper is going to be Shraddha. But this is the eternal pure faith of the jiva. So that faith will impel one to engage in the Lord's devotional service. Now, the other kinds of faith, those which come from seeds of mixed devotion, So that will give one impetus for mundane activities. Yeah, and also you could say, and materialistic religious practices. That's why Bhagavatam mentions in the very beginning, Dhamma Pacitta Kateva Paramo. So Bhagavatam rejects all religious activities which are materially motivated. Yeah, so now this faith, this is the qualification for entering into pure devotional service. So pure faith, this alone qualifies one for practicing pure devotional service. So we're going to look at that. But first, again, how and why does pure faith sprout from the creeper of pure devotion? We've mentioned that. It begins with unknowing devotional acts, agnata sukriti. Now that will accumulate and manifest as an interest in devotees and an interest in Krishna. So that interest, that's going to lead them to start to associate with devotees, with saintly persons. Yeah, they start to associate with the devotees. Now, something happens when someone begins to associate with devotees. You know, they have faith, but it's very pliable. It's very in the early stages, so it's not very deep. But they do have some faith, so therefore they begin to associate with the devotees. Now, when they associate with devotees, the behavior, the teachings, and the behavior, it does create an impression on their heart. We may reflect ourselves when we first started coming to the temple or first starting to associate with devotees, just by hearing what they were saying, then we gain faith in them. Yeah. So we gain trust in the Vaishnavas. So by associating from Agata Sukriti, one becomes attracted to associate with devotees. And then you hear from them. Then one has a favorable impression, and one develops faith in the Vaishnavas. So now this faith is that one has, it's also fortified by Krishna within the heart. He's going to be saying, yes, 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 you are doing the right thing. I remember when I was first coming to the temple, I couldn't really understand much of the philosophy. I didn't read so. I had read Bhagavad Gita. I think I mentioned that before. But something told me inside, you are doing that. I got in this message was coming very clear. Yes, you are doing the right thing. Go back next week. And that inspiration was just like, because I wasn't too sure. But then it was about Krishna within the heart. He was fortifying my little faith that I had in the persons I spoke to. Yeah. So Krishna's working within the heart as well. By the association of devotees, then Krishna is also working in order to fortify this faith. Now then the next step is that one's going to make some type of commitment. Yeah. So in other words, this awakening of firm commitment is the first sprout of the creeper of devotion. So that first commitment may be chanting Hare Krishna, taking up some service, etc. Yeah. So this is what we've just here. So unwanting devotional acts, agata sukriti. One begins to associate with devotees. One develops trust in devotees. Then one makes some type of commitment. Yeah. So firm faith. Now this is from Madhya. This is a definition of faith. The adjective verse is Krishna Bhakti ea Shada Shabdi Vishwa Kahoi Shuddha Nishchoy. Krishna Bhakti Koila Sava Krita Hoy. So, Shraddha is confident, firm faith that by rendering transcendental loving service to Krishna, one automatically performs all subsidiary activities. Such faith is favorable to the discharge of devotional service. Okay? So, now this is from the purple. A person who has this quality of faith thinks pouring water on the root of a tree automatically satisfies the trunk, branches, and twigs. Supplying food to the stomach nourishes the life airs and satisfies the senses. In the same way, worshipping and serving Krishna will automatically satisfy all the demigods and fulfill my needs. So in other words, we have faith that if I just render devotional service to Krishna, everything is going to work out. Yeah, even we may not understand the actual details of it, but we have this firm faith, yeah, that everything is going to be, if we just engage in devotional service, then everything is going to be fulfilled spiritually. Okay, so now these are the characteristics. Well, we've got a few minutes left, so I'll just cover this. The characteristics of pure faith. So these first two, these are the characteristics of pure faith: exclusive dedication and complete dependence. And also, in addition to these, so we mentioned these two: one dedicates, one makes some commitment, and one's complete dependence. This is defined here. This is firm faith. Also, this, in addition to these two, also one gains faith in Scripture or trust in Scripture. So, in other words, when someone is receiving, one is hearing from devotees, then the devotees are constantly referring to the Bhagavad Gita, yeah, and other revealed scriptures like the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that's the foremost authority in a devotee's life is the scriptures. So scripture, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, it exposes the futility of material life and the request for material happiness. And it makes a very clear distinction that we are not the body. So Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada explains again and again. And this attachment to the body or identification for the body is the underlying cause of all suffering. So hearing this, then we develop trust in the scripture and the path that it also maps out. So as well as complete dependence and exclusive dedication, we gain trust in scripture. Now, also one experiences a taste for devotion, a distinct taste for devotional acts. Yeah, so we receive transcendental knowledge and we recognize the futility of past material activities. And then just that in itself, just coming in contact with devotion and taking up devotion, one can feel a great sense of relief, a great sense of release as well, and a great sense of shelter. So it gives a type of inner joy, especially when we engage in acts of devotion, which by nature are selfless because they're dedicated to Krishna. So one gets a taste. One starts to get a taste for doing devotional service, for being with devotees. Yeah. So that kind of a relish. So that combines these acts of devotion that makes one's faith deeper and more concentrated. Yeah. They're experiencing something very substantial. And there isn't anything anyone can say to actually persuade them otherwise. Yeah. So, we have this verse from Raja Vijaya Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, 9th chapter, text 2. Raja Vijaya Viragoyam Paputam Idam Uttamam Pakyachavagamam Damyam Susukutam Avayam. So it gives, the verse describes that one actually perceives devotion to Krishna. It is a direct experience. So that in itself increases one's faith. So that increased strength. Yeah. So in other words, faith is not static, it's a dynamic principle. So these are some of the subjects of the first here, what we're speaking of, or what is actually pure faith. The first creeper of the seed of pure devotion is actually pure faith. And we've just gone over a couple of minutes. So next session, we're going to look at this a bit more, a semblance of faith. Remember, we have the Bhakti ladder beach, then that which looks like devotion, like it's a semblance. So we'll discuss that next week. Any final questions or comments? There wasn't many questions today or comments. But if there's any last questions. Okay. So thank you, dear devotees. And let's continue next week. Same time, I hope. I think I'll be in New York next week, but I'll still be able to go ahead. Okay, so thank you, dear devotees. Thank you for tuning in. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Bhakti
Hare
Cintamani ki jai. Gaura
Hare
Premanande.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare
Hare
Krishna. Hare
Hare
Bol.
Krishna.